Hi everyone, in today's video I'm going to go through our final ethics topic. This one is sex ethics. So this topic is slightly unique in that it isn't about sex ethics that we're looking at necessarily. It's about how your first year ethics topics relate to it. So in order to be able to do this topic you have to have researched and revised natural law, situation ethics, Kant and utilitarianism in order to be able to do this topic. So once you have covered those areas, once you have covered those topics and you are quite happy with them, then that's when you can start going through this PowerPoint. So let me make myself smaller and I'll go over that in a little bit more detail because it's important to understand where this topic falls with the rest. Right, so it is sexual ethics. That is the any second when we'll leave it. So this is an application topic. Now you might remember your application topics from your first year. The other application topics are euthanasia and business ethics. So with euthanasia you only apply it to natural law and situation ethics. With business you only apply it to Kant utilitarianism. With this one you apply all four. So with sex ethics you need to be able to apply all four topics, natural law, situation ethics, Kant and utilitarianism, to it. So there are three areas that the exam's expecting you to know: homosexuality, premarital sex, sex before marriage, and extramarital sex, adultery, extra sex in marriage. So these are the three areas. So when it comes to the exam, or whatever the exam might look like, there are different types of questions they might ask you. You might get a question completely on its own to do with sex. Critically assess the ethical issues surrounding homosexuality. Evaluate the issues with premarital sex, whatever it might be. Or they might specify one of the arguments. Natural law is the best way of dealing with issues surrounding extramarital sex or something like that. So you might get one on its own for sex, or you might get one that applies it across. So you need to be able to know all the different areas. So let's get started. Should sexual behaviour be private and personal or subjected to societal norms and legislation? So do you think sexual behaviour should just be private and personal? What happens behind closed doors happens behind closed doors. If it's private and personal and consented to, is that okay? Or do you think the society should have an impact and influence on it? Do you think legal legislation should also impact it? If we were in class together, we would discuss and look at the different areas of premarital sex and what premarital sex means. So we'd have a look at the different images, what they imply, etc. So it's just worth keeping in mind what your own views are on premarital sex, etc. I like the one in the middle that says it's not premarital sex if you never get married. Obviously, premarital sex was one of those things a lot of years ago when people got married young, and so to have sex before you got married meant that you were having sex at a very, very young age, whereas nowadays it's quite normal for people to be together for a long, long period of time and never actually get married. So premarital sex, you might want to argue, is slightly an outdated societal construct now, when actually a lot of couples and people no longer get married. Premarital sex, where better to start than the Catholic Church? Pope Paul VI, so that husband and wife become in a way one heart and one soul, and together attain their human fulfillment. What I want you to think about this is, can this only be achieved by a man and a woman? He implies that only a man and a woman can be one heart and one soul. And what does this imply about your human fulfillment? Well, it implies that unless you get married, unless you become husband and wife, you will never be fulfilled. It implies that together you can achieve your human fulfillment. So if you didn't do it, does that mean you're no longer fulfilled? Human love does not tolerate trial marriages. It demands a total and definitive gift of persons to one another. This is from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. A trial marriage is where a couple intend to marry but aren't quite married yet. So they live together, they intend to marry, but they aren't quite married yet. Again, what does this imply about love? Neither of these really talk about love. For the Catholic Church, premarital sex does not express fidelity. They do not think premarital sex expresses faithfulness, exclusivity and commitment, and consequently does not tolerate sex before marriage. And I think what's important for you to discuss and explore in your essays and your answers is how premarital sex is often linked with promiscuity. But actually premarital sex, sex before marriage, doesn't necessarily mean promiscuity or being promiscuous or having lots and lots and lots and lots of partners. This point from the Catholic Church certainly implies that if you're having sex before marriage, that you are therefore becoming promiscuous. Is that a fair judgment, and is that a fair link to draw? People who engage in premarital sex are committing a grave sin and are excluded from the sacramental communion until living in a morally correct way. Wow. Well, first of all, how did... you've had premarital sex. I can just tell you're guilty. How do they know? How do they know if you're having premarital sex? And until you're living in the morally correct way, how does being married and having sex make you morally correct? You can explore all of these thoughts and ideas in your essays. Yet the Church of England, good old Church of England, does accept that cohabitation is for many people a step along the way towards that fuller and more complete commitment. So they recognise trial marriages. They recognise cohabiting, meaning living together in order to see if it's going to work. Maybe they recognise that 1 in 3 are getting divorced, so you might wait until you get married and do all the right things and then get divorced. What's worse? Living together beforehand, making sure it's right for you, then getting married and staying together, or not doing any of that, getting married and then getting divorced. So I guess the Church of England is recognising that actually it might be better to cohabit than get divorced. Extramarital sex. So this is adultery. Extramarital sex, how the Church protected women's rights. Lisa Sewell Cahill in Sex, Gender and Christian Ethics argues that historically wealthy, powerful men had concubines, a lower status woman who lived with them like a wife as well as their wives. This meant that men having long-term relationships with several women, polygamy, was common. Adultery was a crime that virtually only women were accused of, and divorce was exclusively a male prerogative. You don't need to know the numbers, it's just to help you see that there's 3 different ways that men's societal, again, a male-dominated patriarchy really valued men over women. Yet the Church actually comes to the rescue. The Church's ban on adultery made it impossible for men to have concubines, and the ban on divorce stopped men abandoning women. Now, we talked about this in passing when you did gender and theology and gender and society, and quite often you went on the attack of the Church and Christianity, which is fair enough. What you need to recognise is a lot of the Bible's teachings on things like adultery were actually to protect women. Because of the patriarchy that was around at the time of the Bible, etc., men could basically dispose of women like that. They could marry them, they could then marry somebody else, they could have concubines, they could divorce the woman with very, very little reason. If the woman didn't do as she was told, etc., they could divorce her, find another wife quite easily. The woman would then be basically out in the cold. Nobody would marry a divorcee, nobody would marry her, nobody would look after her, and obviously it was the men that worked rather than the women. So women didn't have any rights at all until the Church stepped in. The Church was what happened as far as it was when the Church came in to say you are not allowed, so one of the 10 commandments is you are not allowed to be an adulteress, you're not allowed to have more than one wife. If you remember that, I think it's Ephesians, isn't it? With the woman must obey her husband, etc., but man must love his wife. And we said how it was so against women, etc., and how men just have to love their wives, but women have to submit, etc. No, that was because actually having a man love his wife was quite unique at the time. You would think it's a very odd thing now. Why would you marry someone unless you love them? But men could dispose of women quite quickly. Whereas the Church, by saying that, really does emphasise how you need to look after women and look after your wife. And so by saying no adultery, and that meant then no concubines, and they also said no divorce, that meant that when the man married the woman, he stuck with the woman. So this is a really good synoptic link to making your gender topics. You can bring your gender topics back in here. You can bring a bit of Mary Mary Daly in here, because what's an essay without Mary Daly? You can bring her back in here as well, that is fine. But just recognise the church did try and do some things to protect women. So homosexuality, am I telling the truth? Note the age of consent for sex has been 16 for male and female since 1885. Sorry, my cat is chasing pigeons. So the 16, so a man and a woman has been able to have sex at 16 since 1885. How is this different then for homosexuals? In 1967, it was made legal for men aged 21 or over to have sex. In 1994, it was made legal for men aged 18 to have sex. And then within your lifetime, in 2000, the law was changed, allowing homosexuals to be in the armed forces. In 2001, it was made legal for men aged 16 to have sex. So 2001 was when it came in line with male and female. 2002, the law changed, allowing homosexuals to adopt children. In 2014, the first same-sex marriage took place. Now, you're probably recognising that actually all of these are the truth. So I want you to really look at what these say and what these imply. 2001, for sex between two men to finally meet and be equal to the law between male and female, which was 1885. So it's taken all of that time for the law to recognise it equally. 2002 for homosexuals to adopt children. So because you are two men or two women, it took until 2002 for you to be able to adopt a child. Why do you think that is? Why do you think people had so much prejudice against homosexual couples adopting? And finally, 2014 was when the same-sex marriage took place, the civil ceremonies, civil services. I also think it's fairly shocking that in 2000, it took until 2000 for homosexuals to be in the armed forces. Again, you can see how, we'd have had discussions about this in lesson and in class together, but you can really see for you and for your generation, you've grown up in a society that is far more accepting. You've grown up in a time when these laws have changed quite within your time frame. For me, for it to have only come about in 2000, 2001, that's quite a lot, really. That's quite late, in my opinion. And I've really seen how this prejudice has slowly changed and how views towards homosexuality. So please be aware that it hasn't always been like it is now for your generation, that these things have changed quite a lot over the recent years. Homosexuality. Why does the Bible and Christianity have a problem with homosexuality? Have a little research, see what you can find online. But some of these passages help. Leviticus: do not have sexual relations with a woman as one does with. Do not have sexual relations with a man as one does with a woman. That is detestable. Prohibits shrine prostitution, where men and women are able to have sex with men for money, in Deuteronomy. Sodom and Gomorrah. St. Paul noted that men committed shameful acts with other men in Romans. And in St. Paul, to a letter he wrote to Corinthians, also wrote that men who have sex with men will not inherit the kingdom of God. Please do have a look at the story of Sodom and Gomorrah and check out your Brick Testament, your Lego people. That's a really good demonstration of Sodom and Gomorrah. But Sodom and Gomorrah is where two visitors come to the town, and they are welcomed into the community by Lot, and then there's a knock on the door, and the people of the town say, bring out your visitors, bring out these men so we can have sex with them. And Lot says, no, please don't, but you can have my virgin daughters, but please don't touch these people that have come under my roof and are protected by me. Obviously his daughters weren't protected by him. And they said, no, we want to see your visitors, see your guests. And so the visitors then said, we are actually here from God, and God is going to smite this town because of all the bad things that are going on. You must leave now, you must leave. So all his family got up and left, and they said, whatever you do, do not look back. And then Lot's wife looked back and was turned to a pillar of salt. And, there was rain and brimstone and hellfire from God that decimated the town. And so that's known as that's the Sodom and Gomorrah story. So please do make sure you check that out and know it in a little bit more detail, because it is a good example to use. What seems to have been forgotten, though, is that the next story along from Sodom and Gomorrah, so that one's really focused on, but the next story is how Lot's daughters get him drunk and have sex with him in order to procreate. So we seem to focus on the homosexual story, yet we seem to ignore the I can't think of the word, the incest, that happens afterwards. So we seem to forget about the girls wanting to have sex with their dad in the story next. So again, it kind of puts it into context how certain stories are picked out and others not. Oh, and Eve was made from the rib of Adam as well. So Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Hang on though. What are the flaws with using the Bible and applying to modern day debates? Gareth Moore points out that many rules are not so forcefully imposed by Christians today, such as those that advocate beheading or those that forbid the wearing of garments made by two kinds of material found in Leviticus. So it seems for Moore that inconvenient rules are ignored while others that pursue attacking minorities are supported. I think that's a fantastic point from Gareth Moore there, how we selectively use the Bible to promote prejudices, yet ignore other things that are inconvenient, like not eating meat and milk together and things like that. So you really do explore that. Don't just say the Bible is out of date, the Bible was written 2000. It's just boring. Try and come up with more developed evaluation now as far as the reality of using the Bible. The Church is on homosexuality. The Church of England opposes same-sex marriage, therefore requires homosexual clergy to remain celibate. So because you can't marry, you can't have sex, but they will appoint somebody that is homosexual into their clergy as long as they're not practicing. In 2017, the bishops of the Church of England issued a statement called Marriage and the Same-Sex Relationships. This affirmed that marriage is between a man and a woman, so that's 2017, quite recent. Although it's also affirmed that there is a place for homosexuals in the church and that some shame and repentance is appropriate for the way homosexuals have been treated. So there was a recognition there that they are still welcome in the church, even though they are affirming that relationships should be between a man and a woman. However, when taken for a vote between the General Synod, it was rejected. So this idea of recognising homosexuality was then rejected. The Church of England still remains split. So the Church of England is split over allowing and recognising homosexual relationships versus those that don't. The Catholic Church, there is no sin involved in an inclination towards a member of the same sex, as such an inclination is not freely chosen and is a trial. Again, can you remember who talks about trials, testing us? Who talks about this world being a test in order for us to pass it, etc. So see if you can remember who says about it being a trial. So they're saying that it's not a sin, it's just an inclination. Pope Francis says there is absolutely no grounds for considering homosexual unions to be in any way similar or even remotely analogous to God's plan for marriage and family. Oh, Pope Francis, why? So what he's saying there is that homosexual unions are nowhere to be compared to marriage and family of male and female. So analogous meaning an analogy, similar comparison between similar things. He's saying there is no grounds for comparison. A homosexual relationship and a male-female relationship are absolutely not the same. However, he did backtrack when stats showed that 150 to 200 gay men were murdered in Italy every year. And with this in mind, he said, if a person is gay and seeks God and has goodwill, who am I to judge? Is that a little bit too little too late? He'd said it. It's out there. The changing face of the church. The Methodist Church, the United Methodist Church, in the Book of Discipline says, we implore families and churches not to reject or condemn lesbian and gay members and friends. We commit ourselves to be in ministry and with all persons. Now, I really like that because, again, they recognise both lesbian and gay. They're the first church to really talk about it, lesbian and gay, and to really, to actually mention it in words, not just homosexual. So lesbian and gay, this idea of, look at the language used, families, members, friends, all. So far more inclusive there. Some Christian churches have gone further, challenging the traditional disapproval of homosexuality found in the Bible or natural law, maintaining the quality of relationships is what determines its value. They believe that God made us all in the image of God in Genesis, implying that all men and women, regardless of sexual orientation, are by nature good. Otherwise, it implies God intentionally created disorder. Thus, many liberal Christians, including those belonging to the Methodist denomination, maintain that homosexuality is normal and natural and is not changeable or freely chosen. So that's a fantastic standpoint to take as far as having a church to back up your argument. So you've got the Church of England, you've got the Catholic, and then you've got the Methodist standpoint, all taking a different view on homosexuality. I like how the liberal Christians' point talks about it being normal and natural. That's interesting because obviously when we do natural law, they'll use the word natural. So you've got Methodists saying it's natural to be homosexual. You will have natural law, as you can guess, saying it's not natural. So, do you think Christianity should adapt to the changes in society? Why do you think some denominations in Christianity are changing their views on these sexual ethics? And do religious beliefs and practices still have a role in sex ethics? I will create a Padlet board now to be able to share your views on these questions because they're very, very important, certainly when developing and starting to write your essays. So, do you think Christianity should mould itself and change due to societal pressures and norms? Why do you think different denominations have such different views? And do religious beliefs and practices still have a role? Should they even be talked about? Do they even have any importance or relevance today? Right, so the second half of this course of this topic is normative theories. So we've done the first part on the arguments, premarital, extramarital and homosexuality. That's just giving you a very, very brief run through with a few different names and ideas, but you will have enough information from your own understanding of those areas to be able to discuss them fully. It is now applying normative theories that we need to do. So that again is your 4. So normative ethics, we start with our natural law. Right or wrong are fixed truths linking to what makes humans flourish. So if you remember when you've done your revision, natural law is inspired by Aristotle's ideas of eudaimonia and human flourishing. And so obviously natural law takes those ideas and we need to focus on what makes us flourish. And they are fixed truths, your 5 primary precepts. The natural style of intercourse is to be observed. Again, Summa Theologica. Not quite sure what he means by the natural style. I'll let you use your imagination on that one. Catholic approaches to sexual ethics draw heavily upon natural law. Procreation is central to the purpose of sexual intercourse and marriage. So obviously the Catholic Church is heavily, heavily influenced by natural law, as you already know. The first primary precept is preservation of life. The second is reproduction. So procreation and reproduction is the second primary precept. And so that is so, so important within marriage. So, no homosexual sex, no premarital sex, no extramarital sex, no contraception, and no masturbation, because all of these do not support the precepts or support flourishing society. Sex might feel good, but this is an apparent good, not a real good. So again, make sure you know your apparent and real good information. Don't forget, though, that sometimes the way that teachings and laws can be interpreted may change the conclusions drawn. Sorry, excuse me. Sorry about that, folks. Okay, so as I was saying, that sometimes the way that teachings and laws can be interpreted may change the conclusion drawn. So, for example, extramarital sex, as we've already said, is having sex outside your own marriage with somebody else, which is not allowed because you're not allowed to have sex outside of marriage. However, this could be seen as moral as a way of resolving infertility, such as in the Bible when Abraham sired a child with his servant because his wife was infertile. So this is known as surrogate sex. So in this way, whilst it is extramarital sex, it might not be frowned upon. So again, it is very, very important that you use the right language. What you're saying is it might not be, it might be, but it also might not be. Use language that implies or suggests, not concretely asserting a statement. So don't say it is frowned upon, it is not frowned upon. So in order for you to get the B's and the A's in any essay on this, you cannot make assertive, conclusive statements. You cannot say natural law is always against homosexual sex. Natural law is always against premarital sex. No, there might be that doctrine of double effect. That might be that little way of making it actually work, a bit like extramarital sex in this sense. So please watch your language and how you do it. So you could say natural law implies homosexual sex might be wrong, and then explain why, etc. That's fabulous. Let me see if I can think of any other examples. You could argue that IVF, obviously IVF, you need to masturbate in order to be able to use IVF. IVF, though, might be seen as unnatural, but you are using your God-given gift of reason in order to promote reproduction, which is the second primary precept. So actually, maybe that is allowed, but then that would involve masturbation, for example. So different things like that. So you've got to really think about it, hence why you've got to think about them in order to get to the A's and the B's. Situation ethics, if you remember Joseph Fletcher, do you remember his examples? Now, Joseph Fletcher gave, or we discussed anyway, 4 of his examples. You had that big A3 sheet and you had 2 on one side and 2 on the other. And some of them actually link really well to sex ethics. Do you remember the woman, that should be woman, in a prison of war camp, not women, the woman in a prison of war camp who asked the guard, who was not a husband, to have sex with her, impregnate her so she could leave the camp. So situation that obviously focuses on agape love. That was a situation where she had extramarital sex, but in order to be able to get pregnant to leave the camp. So what's the most loving thing in that situation? He also talks about the spy who has sex with the enemy agent in order to end the war. So if you are asked by your government to have sex with somebody that is not your husband or premarital or someone you don't even like, but in order to get information that could save the country. So he gives those 2 examples which work really well for sex ethics. Both of these examples, Fletcher argues, can be seen as ethical. However, these examples have been criticised for being exceptional circumstances and are not suitable for a basis for general moral thinking. Well, of course, they're exceptional, but you know, then it brings out the question of, well, what classes as exceptional? How do you know if your situation is acceptable or exceptional or not, etc. But for Fletcher, that was the whole point of situation ethics, to help deal with moral decisions when the usual moral rules don't apply. The question still stands though, can situation ethics be applied to more day-to-day moral choices? Situation ethics focuses upon the particular situation, interests of the individual person, love and justice, selfless, unconditional love, which is not the same as erotic love. So, yes, these imply that one might be permitted to break the traditional moral rules around sex in day-to-day decision-making if love is promoted, if it's justice, if it's unconditional, if the particular situation allows it. This is a pragmatic approach, setting aside fixed moral truth in order to put the person and their relationship at the heart of each decision. Situation ethics is always open to breaking traditional ethical rules, including sexual ethical rules, because decisions are made situationally, not prescriptively. You don't prescribe a behaviour, you work on situation. However, difficulties with applying situation ethics to sexual ethics emerge when considering how other people are affected in such situations. Situation ethics put the primary people first, but then what about the broader family, the community, the interests of society? So if it works for you, what about the ripple effects? The most loving thing to do in your situation is a private and consensual homosexual relationship. But then what happens if you're doing this in a Muslim community or some, like Saudi Arabia, and the community, it's against the law, or the community doesn't disagree with it? How far do you look at the ripples of love, or the ripples that it affects? Where actually you need to look at the law rather than love itself. Kant. There are a number of things at the heart of Kantian ethics, including freedom. This was extremely important to Kant. Autonomy was so important to him, and thus consent was a priority. Consenting promises, always considering the value or worth of the people involved, dignity and equality and equal rights. Now, if I remember from our first year, we weren't big fans of Kant. Kant always gets quite a bad rep, so I know that we're not big fans of Kant. When Kant comes to sex ethics, though, he has a real, genuine understanding of important things surrounding sexual ethics. All the words there are of such importance: consent, autonomy, dignity, worth, value, equality. All of these are so important. The categorical imperative first formulation is obviously universalizability, so applying maxims or general rules to everyone. So what I would like you to do is apply the first formulation, universalizability, to homosexuality, extramarital and premarital sex. Does the formulation go for or against these issues, and why? So you have to be able to apply universalizability across. How could Kant's own examples apply to these? Do you remember Kant's examples for universalizability? If you can't remember them, find them back in your notes. You should have gone over them. So you need to have Kant's own 4 examples. Can you apply those 4 examples to? So one was suicide, if you remember. So those are the 4. Can you apply those 4 to extramarital, homosexual and premarital? Some of them you can't link that well, but others really work. And could you find any ways as to why Kant's argument could argue the alternative view as well? So, for example, if it's for, how could you go against? So, for example, what I mean by that is universalizability, applying it to homosexuality. If everyone all over the world was homosexual, would something bad happen? Yes, there'd be no procreation, the human race would die out, something bad would happen. How could you maybe spin that, though, so it was something that could happen? How could you maybe change your maxim? How could you maybe change if everyone was homosexual, something bad would happen? How could you maybe change that to allow homosexuality? See if you can play around with your maxim. The second formulation, means to an end. Don't treat others as a means to your own pleasure. So no rape, no forced marriage, no objectifying people such as pornography. And sex within marriage is about union and sexual enjoyment, not just procreation. So again, Kant, unlike natural law, recognised the importance of pleasure rather than pleasure for Aquinas just being an apparent good, not a real good. For Kant, it's very, very important. When you're looking at the means to an end, it's interesting though that obviously rape and pornography are quite different. Pornography, you're quite often volunteering, consenting to it, and it's often quite a good business for a lot of women, whereas obviously rape is something with no consent. So maybe you could discuss those as well, the means to an end. What happens if it involves consent? Finally, utilitarianism, often called libertarianism. These are consenting adults do as they want, protects freedom of choice. The harm principle, now this is really, really important for utilitarianism, is the harm principle. You have to talk about this and recognise it. Basically, you have to consider the harm that your actions have on other people. So extramarital affairs, for example, cause long-term harm, so therefore should not be done. Praise of safe sex as unwanted pregnancies, HIV, STIs, and broken hearts, all equals pain. So you want to praise safe sex in order to avoid pain and create more pleasure and happiness. Bentham wanted the greatest well-being for everyone, thus believed the rules of marriage protect those involved against pre- and extramarital sex. However, questions do arise again. Who do we consider the happiness of pleasure of? Is it just the people involved, the homosexual couple, for example, or the wider society? Does homosexuality harm society and cause unhappiness for the majority who may be opposed to same-sex relationships? Think about extramarital sex. You are married to somebody and you have an affair. You've got two people that are happy, the person you're having an affair with and yourself, and only one person unhappy. So does that mean an extramarital affair in that sense is allowed because you've got more people happy against that? Or does the harm principle that you create for that person you're cheating on outweigh the happiness and pleasure that those two get? So again, there are no right or wrong answers here. The whole point of an essay is to explore, it could be this, but how about this? But then what about this? This might imply, this might suggest. That's what your essays are about. The secular views of J.S. Mill, John Stuart Mill, he's your pig man. Mill was concerned with the extent to which religion forbids certain behaviours, envisaging a free, liberal society moving away from constraints of religion. Again, we know why religion forbids certain things in order to protect women, so don't forget that. But Mill came from it for quite a liberal society angle. Mill fought for artificial contraception being available to the poor, something prohibited by the church at the time and still remains forbidden by the Catholic Church today, so using contraception. Don't forget, Mill was hundreds of years ago. That's really, really before his time as far as, trying to promote contraception. Women's rights, there's him and his wife. Gender equality and the marriage that promotes equal partnerships, specifically how the church and the law constrains women, so equal partnership. This was revolutionary for his time. He really, really did stand out as far as, supporting women in gender equality and partnerships, etc. So very, very interesting. Maybe his wife's crushing his shoulder a bit there and saying to him, yes, you will promote women's equality. Who knows? In On Liberty, he said, sex is a principle of perfect quality, admitting no power or privilege on the one side, nor disability on the other. Equality. It's about equality, no power or privilege on the one side, nor disability on the other. Okay, so the final part of this is your evaluation. So the final part of this is that you need to be able to evaluate if these arguments and theories are useful. Obviously, what we've done so far has all been quite descriptive. You have to, in your essays, 80% of your essays is the backwards and forwards, is the evaluation. Does it work? Does it not work? Which one's better? Which one's not as good? Etc., etc. So these are a few bits of evaluation to help you out. Evaluation of natural law. The cross means a weakness. Is it an unnatural act always wrong if it's mutual and consensual? So if homosexuality is mutual and consensual, is it wrong? Is what is natural always right? What about sexual abuse within marriage? So what happens if you are married but your partner forces you to have sex, the sexual abuse? Natural law would actually imply that's all right because they said it's only sex in marriage. So is what is natural always right? It's illogical to say that an infertile couple cannot have sex. What about love, commitment, connection? This is things that natural law does not mention or focus upon. Aquinas was celibate. He said that it was an excuse for the minority called to serve God. So not only is he celibate, which you cannot promote to everybody, what does he know about sex, really? Can masturbation and homosexuality be argued to be natural? So due to kind of pleasure zones, things like that. Masturbation is often a build-up that, in order to help men not become as aggressive and volatile, etc. So can masturbation be something that is necessary? And as I said, homosexuality, where the different pleasure zones are, can it be seen as natural? There's many, many animals in the animal kingdom that are homosexual. Again, does that show that it's natural? Is it natural to only have one partner and a monogamous relationship if sex is centred purely on reproduction? Now, I think this is a very, very interesting argument and a very, very interesting point. If we're focusing on what is natural, is marriage actually natural? Is marrying one person natural? Very, very few animals in the animal kingdom, penguins, lobsters, etc., swans, you know, have one partner for life and they stick with that one partner for life. But on the whole, the majority of the animal kingdom go to the nearest healthiest species in order to reproduce. So is monogamy actually natural or not? Liza says to condemn people for using their sexual organs for pleasure, e.g. elderly couples cannot reproduce, reveal prejudices and irrational taboos of society. Basically, if you can't have sex for pleasure, that means that people that are past menopause, so a woman that's past, 50s, 60s, cannot have sex for the rest of her life because, you can't reproduce. What about pleasure? Without contraception, the world will be overpopulated and spread of STIs. So evaluation of Kant. Strength is important. So even though I haven't done any strengths of natural doesn't mean there are no strengths. I've just gone for the most obvious weaknesses here, but please do explore the strengths of natural law. Emphasises the importance of equality and not treating others as a tool for our own pleasure. It recognises the importance of pleasure within a marriage. Sexual relations always recognise the other person as free, never means to an end. However, it ignores the importance of emotions within a relationship. Just because something cannot be universalised does not mean it's wrong. There'd be no variation. And finally, evaluation of utilitarianism. It emphasises the importance of pleasure within a relationship, allows sexual freedom and choice, emphasises consent, equality, pleasure and love mutually. It's realistic, so it recognises the need for contraception and safe sex. Flexible and subjective, so it can be applied to individual situations. However, it is hard to apply the hedonic calculus in specific situations. Mill says that sex is a lower pleasure, but don't humans experience it differently to animals? Is it a lower or higher because we involve love and honesty, etc.? It's teleological, so can you always predict what you will do will bring out the most happiness? Do emotions and passion cloud our judgment? And that's it for that one. There's no strengths and weaknesses on this PowerPoint for situation ethics, but again, use the strengths and weaknesses on the situation ethics PowerPoint as it is, and obviously you can apply them across. So again, situation ethics teleological. Can you predict what the outcome will be? How far do the ripples go? Do you just look at the agape within a situation? Is situation ethics just good on paper? Is it actually practical to use in reality? Because there's no guidelines for situation ethics, is it quite hard to actually apply? So is it, if you've got a specific situation in front of you, is situation ethics something that you can apply easily, or does it actually just give you no clear guidelines on what to do? So please just use these as a starting point for your evaluation, because obviously most of your essay will be evaluating whether these arguments work, do not work, are convincing, are not convincing, are easy to apply or not to those three parts of sexual ethics: premarital, extramarital, homosexuality. Do not go down any other route. Do not talk about contraception. Do not talk about pornography. Do not talk about FGM. Do not talk about anything else related to sex. You have to just talk about those three. Okay? Right, folks, that one's quite a long one, so thank you for maintaining with it. Obviously, it is a long one because you've got to go through what the three things are to begin with, then how the four apply. This, however, is only the starting point. This PowerPoint is extremely descriptive. So what we will do together is we will have a look at putting them on a spectrum of how convincing they are, how good they are applying. We'll also do some tables where you actually have to apply each of the arguments to each of the different things, so homosexuality, etc. So you need to be able to apply them across fully. So thanks very much for watching, everyone, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks very much.